Welcome to Reformed Thinking. We're glad you're with us for this installment of the Deep Dive.
Today we're going to be doing a close analysis of a single Old Testament Hebrew word, but one that is, well, huge in its significance, Shamayim.
Right, that's the word we usually see in our English Bibles as heaven, or sometimes sky. And it is everywhere. I mean, the source materials note it appears around 420 times in the Old Testament alone.
It's one of the most foundational words for understanding the biblical cosmos.
And what struck me right away is that this one word is doing a lot of work. It covers everything from, the visible atmosphere where you see clouds, all the way to the transcendent dwelling place of God.
That dual function is really the key. Our mission here is to move past the simple English word sky and really get a feel for the physical, the cosmological, and the theological weight that Shamayim carried in its original context.
This is the space where birds fly and rain falls.
And it's the exalted, invisible realm of God's throne. It's a complete definition of the non-earthly part of the created universe.
Okay, so let's start where a good deep dive should, with the word itself, the linguistics, because there's a little surprise hidden right in its form.
There is. When you look at the Hebrew, Shamayim, that ending, the im suffix, usually signifies a dual. It means two of something.
Like yadayim for two hands or onayim for two eyes. So your first instinct is to think, okay, two heavens, maybe an upper and lower heaven or something like that.
That would be the logical assumption. But the grammatical analysis in all the sources confirms that this is misleading. While it looks dual, it's actually treated as a plural noun.
So not two, but many, or just big.
Big is the right idea. It's what grammarians call a plural of spatial extension. Think of the Hebrew word for water, mayim. It's also a plural, but it doesn't mean two waters. It refers to a large, undifferentiated mass of water.
Ah, okay. So it's not counting units of sky. It's a way of expressing the vast, continuous expanse over our heads, the totality of that upper region.
That's it. It communicates boundlessness, scope, magnitude.
And this isn't just a quirk of Hebrew, is it? The root itself is all over the ancient world.
That's right, and that gives us some really helpful context. The sources list its cognates in other Semitic languages. You've got Akkadian shamu, Ugaritic shum, Arabic sama. You see it in later dialects too, the Dead Sea Scrolls, Samaritan texts, Phoenician inscriptions.
So this idea of a vast celestial realm captured by this specific linguistic root was a core concept across the ancient Near East long before the Israelites.
A very widespread and ancient idea. And you mentioned the Phoenician inscriptions. That's a great example because it's tied to the deity Ba'alamum, the Lord of Heaven. That immediately frames the theological context for Israel's use of the term. It's not happening in a vacuum.
Not at all. It's part of a larger conversation and often a confrontation.
And speaking of context, we should probably address a common theory about the word's origin, its etymology, which is pretty popular but has mostly been set aside by modern scholarship.
This would be the idea that Shamayim is a compound word.
Yes, the theory that it's made up of sha, which is a pronoun that can mean that which, and mayu, meaning water.
So if you put them together, you get that which is of the waters, or maybe the place for water.
And you can see why that's so attractive, can't you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you read Genesis 1, and the rakia, the firmament, is created specifically to separate the waters below from the waters above. If heaven is the place where God stores those cosmic waters, the place for water is a perfect description.
It seems to link the word itself directly to the creation narrative. It's a very neat, internal Hebrew explanation, a kind of popular etymology.
So why don't linguists generally accept it anymore?
Well, the main reason given in the sources is that it feels a bit too focused on an inner Hebrew explanation. It doesn't find strong support when you look at those cognate languages we just talked about.
Yeah.
The Akkadian or Ugaritic forms don't really break down that way.
So it's more likely a case of a convenient sound-alike. The Israelites heard Shamayim and heard the echo of mayim, water, and used that association theologically.
That's the general consensus. They likely noticed and used that phonetic likeness to reinforce the function of the firmament as this great water holder, but it probably wasn't the historical origin of the word itself.
Okay, that gives us a really solid linguistic foundation. It's a plural of extension, meaning the entire expanse above, and its connection to water is more theological than etymological. So let's pivot from the word to the world it describes. The physical, structural heaven.
And the first thing to get our heads around is that the biblical worldview doesn't see Shamayim as empty space. It's not a vacuum. It's presented as a definable, established, and often a seemingly solid structure, a created dome or vault.
And the key technical term for that is rakia, which we often translate as firmament. Genesis 1.8 says God called the rakia Shamayim, so it directly equates the sky with this firm, solid thing.
And the idea of it being a fixed structure is backed up by the verbs used to describe its creation. The sources point out how often the verb not is used, which means to stretch out or to spread out.
Like spreading a tent canvas.
That's the image. It's used 9 times with heaven as the object, especially in Isaiah. God stretching out the heavens like a tent to live in or like a curtain. It's an active, powerful act of construction.
And the sources show that the imagery goes even further than a tent. They describe actual architectural supports for this thing. The ancient cosmos is a built environment.
It is. We move from a tent to a building. Job 26.11 gives one of the clearest pictures, describing heaven as resting on columns, the Amudei Amayim. These pillars are what give it stability.
Pillars holding up the sky. It suggests that if those were to shake, the whole sky would collapse. That's a fundamentally different way of thinking about the cosmos than our modern understanding of gravity.
A completely different model. And we also see references to the foundations of heaven, Mosado Hashamim, in 6 Samuel 22.8.
And what's interesting there, as the source material points out, is that the parallel passage in Psalm 18 attributes the shaking foundations to the mountains.
Right, which shows this language is being used poetically and analogically. The point isn't a literal blueprint. The point is to communicate maximum stability. Whether it's the sky's foundations or the earth's, the structure is fixed and ordered unless God himself intervenes.
So if it's a fixed, stretched out structure, it has to have edges and openings. What do the texts say about its shape and boundaries?
They mention the Shamayim in Job 22.14, the dome or circle of heaven, which describes that curved, vault-like shape. And its sheer extent is described with phrases like, from the edge of the sky to the edge of the sky, defining the absolute limit of the visible world.
And a solid dome needs a way for things to pass through. This is where you get the mechanisms for weather and divine provision.
Absolutely. The openings are crucial for explaining how God interacts with the world below. Genesis 7 talks about the arubo hashamayim, the apertures or windows of heaven, opening up to let the floodwaters pour through.
Windows that can be opened and closed by God. It's a very direct image of sovereign control.
And it's not just for judgment, it's also for provision. Psalm 78 speaks of God opening the Dalte Shamayim, the doors of heaven, to rain down manna. So these aren't just holes, they're architectural features that regulate what passes from the realm above to the world below. The heavens are a mechanism.
Okay, so we have this solid structural layer, the rakia, held up by columns and fitted with doors and windows. Now let's talk about the space below that structure, the atmospheric realm where everyday life happens.
Right. The sources are clear that Shamayim also functions as the word for the higher atmosphere, the air below the firmament, even though Hebrew doesn't have a specific word for air in the way we think of it.
And the easiest way to see that is with the creatures that live there. The birds of the sky, Opashamayim, that phrase shows up 38 times. Genesis, Jeremiah, all over the place. It confirms that the aerial realm is part of the Shamayim.
And it's a source of weather, all the things that sustain life on Earth. Rain, whether it's the gentle mare or the heavy garajum, comes from the heavens.
As does dew, snow, shelling, frost, a good pour. All these meteorological phenomena are sourced specifically from the Shamayim. So it's an active part of the created order, necessary for life.
But that points to the dual nature of God's action through the heavens. It's the source of life-giving water, but it can also be the conduit for destruction.
Right. The heavens, under God's control, can unleash some pretty devastating things. The sources mention fire and brimstone in Genesis 19.
Or the hailstones in Joshua 10. Even things like sand and dust are described in Deuteronomy 28 as a curse descending from the sky. The heavens can become a weapon in God's hand.
So we've got the solid structure, the rakia, and the atmospheric space below it. Now let's move even higher to the things in that structure, the celestial bodies. This is where the physical sky connects to cosmic order and knowledge.
This is the upper layer, which contains the Kokabe Hajamayim, the stars of heaven. And they're often used as a metaphor for an uncountable number, right? Reflecting the covenant promise to Abraham that his descendants would be as countless as the stars.
And they're also called the Abba Hajamayim, the host of heaven. That's a fascinating term. It suggests something organized, almost military.
It does. It's usually used for the sun, moon, and stars, but in some places it can overlap and refer to the angelic host as well. It defines a whole created order of non-earthly beings. But the key is that they are an organized host, created and commanded by God, not autonomous powers.
And their regularity and visibility naturally led ancient peoples to study them, often for divination. But the Old Testament is very strong in its warning against that.
This is a critical theological boundary. Israel's neighbors deified the celestial bodies, so the sources are explicit in condemning those who are astrologers. The Shibere Amim in Isaiah 47, it's linked to seeking guidance outside of God's revealed word.
And Jeremiah warns the people not to be terrified by the signs of heaven, the Oto HaShamayim. The stars are created things. They are signs of God's creative work, but they are not sources of secret knowledge or faith themselves.
That distinction is central. They are part of the created structure, but they are subservient to the Creator. No part of creation, however magnificent, gets to have divine status. That's a core Reformed view of creation.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, we've established the structure, the contents, the proper theological boundaries. Now let's zoom out a bit and look at how Shamayim is used with other words to define the whole universe.
This brings us to probably the most common pairing in the Bible, heaven and earth. When you see Shamayim paired with Eri, or earth, it's functioning as a merism.
A merism being where you name two opposites to signify the totality of everything in between.
That's it. So heaven and earth means the entire created cosmos, the mundus universus, as the sources call it.
And we see it right from the beginning, Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. The sources note that specific order, heaven first, appears 17 times.
And sometimes the order is flipped, like in Genesis 2, earth and heaven, but the function is the same. It's defining the whole scope of reality.
But this pairing isn't just a list of ingredients for creation. It's used rhetorically, too.
Oh, absolutely. It's used to give weight to statements. For example, they are called upon as witnesses. Isaiah 1, hear, O heavens, and listen, O earth. They're the ultimate, stable reference points for God's covenant dealings.
This contrast of heightened depth also extends to other pairings, setting up the full vertical axis of the cosmos.
Right, to define the absolute boundaries of reality.
So at the deepest watery level, you have Shamayim contrasted with the deep, the Tohum.
Yes, in places like Genesis 49 and Proverbs 8, it's a contrast between the height of God's created order and the depth of the unorganized, chaotic waters that existed before creation was finished. It's order versus chaos.
And then, even deeper than the watery deep, you have the contrast with the realm of the dead, the underworld, Shofel.
And this is the most extreme contrast. Amos 9 and Psalm 139 use this pairing, from the height of heaven to the depths of Sheol, to show that there is nowhere to escape God's presence or his reach. His sovereignty covers the absolute highest and lowest points of existence.
So before we move into the purely theological, there's one more special term we need to look at that deals with this idea of scope. Shema HaShamayim, the heaven of heavens.
Yes, and this is a phrase you find in some very elevated contexts. Deuteronomy 10, Solomon's prayer, and 1 Kings 8, Psalm 148.
And given that some ancient cultures had ideas about, multiple stacked heavens, you might think this refers to the very highest layer in a literal stack, this seventh heaven or something like that.
That's the intuitive reading, but the sources suggest that's not quite what's going on with the Hebrew.
It's more of a grammatical device.
It seems to be. It's an intensive or a superlative expression. Just like Holy of Holies means the most holy place, or King of Kings means the supreme king.
So heaven of heavens just means the highest possible heaven, the heaven in its greatest, most expansive totality, the absolute zenith of creation.
Right. It's a rhetorical way of expressing maximum majesty and scale. It emphasizes the greatness of the setting for God's throne.
That entire framework, the structure, the contents, the scope, brings us to the main point. All of this exists for one reason, the Creator. So let's get into the theological heaven.
This is where we see God's sovereignty defined most clearly. The heavens are not some eternal, uncreated realm. They are not a deity. They are emphatically made by God.
And the sources list a whole inventory of verbs driving this point home. God made them. Hoya, he created them, Badia. He stretched them out, Naya. He established them, Konan, even built them, Bana.
That repetition is so intentional, it hammers home the point that the heavens are a creature, not the creator. They're called the work of your hands in Psalm 102. And most significantly, they were created by the word of Yahweh in Psalm 33.
Which lines up perfectly with the Reformed understanding of creation by divine fiat. God speaks, and it is.
And because he created them, they become his proper dwelling place, his throne room.
So the Shamayim becomes synonymous with where God's authority is centered. It's called your holy dwelling, Moam Korsha, or the place of your throne, constitute.
And often it's just simplified to God's throne itself, his kisi. These are spatial metaphors that help us grasp his exalted nature and his absolute authority.
And we also see God described as the Rukab Shamayim, the one who rides on heaven.
Yes, which is probably a very ancient expression, but it still communicates his complete dominion over the celestial sphere. The heavens are his domain, his property, his vehicle. He is in control of it all.
The sources even describe the heavens as God's own and as his holy heaven, setting that realm apart as pure and belonging only to him.
Now, this very strong connection between heaven and God's dwelling sets up what might be the most critical theological statement in the sources, a necessary counterbalance.
This is the declaration of God's transcendence, even though heaven is his throne.
The sources state very clearly that even the heaven of heavens cannot encompass God. That's from 1 Kings 8, Solomon's prayer at the dedication of the temple.
He uses that superlative term we just talked about, heaven of heavens, to describe the absolute maximum extent of creation, and then he immediately says it's not big enough.
It's a massive theological corrective. It prevents us from thinking of God as a physical being contained inside a celestial palace. The structure, even at its most grand, is insufficient to hold the Creator.
Because, as Jeremiah 23 says, God fills the heaven and the earth. He's omnipresent.
So he simultaneously dwells in heaven as the center of his manifest glory and governmental authority, but he is also transcendently unbound by it. He acts from heaven, but he isn't contained in heaven.
And that ability to act from heaven shows his direct sovereign engagement with the world.
That's right. Shamayim is the stage for his governance. When people pray, God listens from heaven, he speaks his law from heaven, he announces his judgments from heaven. The line of communication is from the exalted sphere downward.
And it's not just verbal. He physically controls the mechanisms of the heavens we talked about earlier.
He does. He can close up the skies so there's no rain, as Deuteronomy says. This shows his control over both blessing and cursing, over the very means of life on earth.
We also see more dramatic physical actions.
Yeah. He thunders in the heavens. He shakes the heavens. The prophets even call on him to rip open the heavens and come down. His movement between the heavenly and earthly realms is direct and powerful, and his oversight is constant. He looks down from heaven and observes everything.
And he can send his agents from there as well.
Correct. The angel of the Lord calls from heaven to Abraham in Genesis 22. So heaven isn't a barrier. It's the platform from which an omnipotent God governs and interacts with his creation.
This whole analysis of God as the creator and ruler from heaven brings us to our last section, how human culture and language then relate to this celestial dwelling.
A good place to start is with that specific title for Yahweh, God of heaven. It becomes very common in the post-exilic period.
We see it all over. Hoshea HaShamayim shows up in Ezra, Nehemiah, Jonah. And the related phrase, Hol HaShamayim, is in Psalm 136.
And its prevalence in that later period is telling. It was a deliberate statement being made in a cosmopolitan Gentile world. As we mentioned earlier, other cultures use that title for their own deities, like Baalamim.
So by the Israelites insisting that Yahweh is the one true God of heaven, they were making a polemical statement. They were declaring his supremacy over all rival gods and astral cults. It's an identity marker.
And for all that Shamayim is used as a metaphor for stability and permanence, the sources make a striking counterpoint. The heavens are not eternal.
Right. They are created, so they have a beginning, and they will also have an end. This is key to preventing any deification of the cosmos itself. Job speaks of things lasting until heaven is no more.
And Isaiah gives us that vivid image of the heavens being rolled up like a scroll, like a worn-out piece of clothing that's being put away because its job is done.
Because God has plans for a replacement. Isaiah looks forward to new heavens and a new earth. This shows that the current configuration of creation is finite and completely subject to the eternal will of the Creator.
And that transitoriness sets the stage for how humans interact with this majestic but temporary celestial realm.
There are physical acts that acknowledge the authority there. The sources mention swearing an oath by lifting one's hand up to heaven, physically pointing to the seat of ultimate authority as your witness.
And there's also the theme of human aspiration to reach that realm. The accounts of someone trying to climb up to heaven or Elijah being taken up are often contrasted with God's effortless action of descending.
Like at the Tower of Babel, humanity strives to build its way up,
while God sovereignly and easily comes down. It defines that vertical separation between the finite creature and the infinite creator.
Lastly, there's that interesting linguistic development, especially in the Aramaic tradition, where Shamayim becomes a substitute word for God himself.
a circumlocution. It comes from a place of deep reverence for the divine name. So in Daniel, you see the phrase that Nebuchadnezzar will be restored when he recognizes that heaven has the power.
Heaven there just stands in for God. The dwelling place becomes synonymous with the one who dwells there.
It shows how tightly the concepts became linked. By referring to the setting, you are inherently referring to the sovereign who rules from it.
We have certainly covered a lot of ground here with shame. We went from its plural form to its physical structure with columns and windows to the way it defines the entire cosmos.
And most critically, we've seen its theological significance. It's created by God, it serves as his throne room, it's the platform for his action, and yet it is utterly insufficient to contain the transcendent God who fills all things.
The sheer scope of this one word, from the simple domain of birds and rain to the majestic setting of the divine throne, is just incredible. But the sources give us one final, deep insight about God's own character that I think is a good place for us to end.
It connects God's very nature to this vast, created expanse. The Psalms, in particular, say that God's essential covenant attributes, his aseh, his covenant love, his ayek, his righteousness, and his munah, his faithfulness, are all fixed in the heavens.
But wait, that creates a bit of a tension, doesn't it?
It does. It creates a fascinating theological paradox for us to think about. We just established that the physical heavens are finite. They're going to be rolled up and replaced. They're temporary.
Yet the biblical writers use this temporary object to describe God's most stable, eternal attributes. The very things that guarantee his relationship with his people are compared to the sky.
So the final thought for you to consider is this. What does it mean when the faithfulness and righteousness of the eternal creator are measured against a created object that is, by its very nature, transient?
I think the answer has to be in the rhetorical force of it. It's using the biggest, most stable thing within creation to give us a picture of something that is, in reality, infinitely beyond creation. The heavens are the best analogy our finite minds can grasp.
But the scope and security of God's character are vastly greater. The temporary nature of the created Shamayim ends up pointing to the infinite security of the God who made it. You're asked to consider how the limits of creation help us understand the limitlessness of the covenant-making God.
A really powerful thought to end on for this deep dive into Shamayim. Thank you for listening.